My husband pretended to love me while secretly plotting with his mistress to steal the inheritance my grandmother left me, a historic house and a trust worth hundreds of thousands. He thought I was blind, but I was already collecting receipts, recordings, and proof of every lie. The night he slid the papers across the table, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was ready to turn his betrayal into the biggest trap of his life. I used to think marriages unraveled with fireworks, shouting matches, slammed doors, broken plates, but mine started to come apart in whispers, the kind of too careful kindness that feels like a hand over your mouth. The late-night showers that rinsed away hotel soap I didn't own, the way my husband, Daniel, began calling me Sam like a nickname he was practicing on someone else first. It was the Friday after my grandmother's funeral when the first real crack showed, the day her attorney handed me a faded envelope with my name written in Grandma Ruth's looping hand and told me the house on Willow Lane would pass to me alone, along with a trust she'd set up for your future, darling, whatever that becomes. I cried in the parking lot holding that envelope, thinking of summers in her kitchen and the smell of peach pie, thinking of how she used to tuck my hair behind my ear and say, "You have to learn to keep what's yours." I didn't know then how literal those words would become. When I got home, Daniel hugged me a little too tightly, his cheek pressed to my hair, his voice syrup-sweet as he said how proud he was of how I handled the funeral. Proud, as if grief were a performance. He set a glass of wine in my hand and asked very casually whether Grandma had sorted her affairs. The phrase sounded strange in his mouth, like a suit that didn't fit. I told him about the house and the trust, about how the will named me sole heir. His smile barely flickered, but it flickered, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next week was a museum of small alarms. Daniel started coming home late, smelling like citrus cologne and dry hotel air. He began forgetting his phone around me, face down, notifications silenced, and he was suddenly full of admiration for Grandma's place, how historic charm was so in right now, how we could leverage the equity, how merging assets would make us more efficient. I'm a product manager. My skin itched at his vocabulary. People who love you don't talk about you like spreadsheets. In the spare room we used as an office, a manila folder appeared on the desk one evening, as if it had grown there. "Honey," Daniel said too casually, "my friend's a financial advisor. He mocked up a simple joint ownership agreement so we can refinance the Willow Lane place at a better rate. Just housekeeping." Housekeeping didn't usually come watermarked and stamped, with clauses about survivorship and irrevocable transfers. I flipped through the pages slowly, my breath skating against my ribs. My name was printed under grantor, Daniel's under grantee, and there it was in clean legal lines, a neat little rope to tie everything my grandmother left me to a boat Daniel could sail away with. "We can talk through it later," he chirped, kissing my temple, already walking toward the shower. The water came on. I sat perfectly still and listened to it hammer the tile. That night I dreamed I was in Grandma's house again, the sun pooling on the old hardwood floors, the ticking clock on the mantel like a heartbeat. In the dream the front door kept opening and closing by itself, letting in wind that lifted the edges of the rug. "You have to learn to keep what's yours," she told me without moving her lips, and when I woke up I was already reaching for my phone. I didn't call Daniel's advisor. I called Grandma's attorney instead, the one with the steady eyes and the voice like a level. I read him the clauses. I heard the shape of his frown through the line. "Do not sign anything," he said, crisp as a gavel. "Schedule time with me. Bring every paper he's given you." He paused. "And Samantha, password protect that trust file." Today, I changed the passwords on my laptop, on the cloud drive, on the email account that held the scanned will and the trust documents. I moved the originals from our firebox to the safe deposit box at the bank, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the key twice. When I got home, Daniel was chipper, almost buoyant, the way people are when they've already decided your part in the story. He wanted to take me to dinner, somewhere nice. He said it would be good for me. I said I had a migraine and watched his smile crease at the edges again, as if the mask pinched. On Saturday, he went for a last-minute client meeting. I drove to Willow Lane alone, parking on the cracked driveway beneath the sycamore Grandma loved. The house was quiet in the way old houses are, the air cool and slightly sweet, like time had a taste. I walked each room and whispered the names of things, The pie safe, the wavy glass windows, the narrow staircase scuffed by 3 generations. In Grandma's bedroom, I pulled out the bottom dresser drawer and felt for the little notch on the left, the secret she taught me when I was 10. The hidden compartment clicked open. Inside, a velvet ring box, a stack of letters tied with ribbon, and a brown envelope with my name on it again. If you're reading this, she'd written, I'm not there to make tea and talk sense, so read slowly and do not be afraid. People will surprise you when money is in the room. Keep copies. Keep dates. Keep your head. I sat on the edge of her bed and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to at the funeral, messy, animal sobs that left me hiccuping. When I could breathe again, I photographed every letter, every note. I texted Grandma's attorney and set a meeting for Monday morning. Then I sat in the kitchen, at the table where she'd taught me fractions using pie slices, and I made a list. At the top, I wrote in capital letters, keep what's yours. Sunday afternoon, I found the missing proof I didn't know I was looking for. Daniel was in the shower, his phone charging on my side of the bed, when it lit with a message preview that landed like a gunshot. Can't wait to see you, D. Did she sign yet? A heart emoji and a champagne bottle. The contact name was just an initial, L, but I didn't need a full name to understand the algebra. I opened nothing. I took a photo of the lock screen and put his phone back exactly as I'd found it. In the mirror, I looked like someone I didn't recognize, eyes too bright, mouth too calm. I thought about the blue dress I wore to our wedding, the way he made a toast about building a life, about being partners, about honesty and trust. I thought about the house on Willow Lane and the trust my grandmother built brick by brick, and a strange clarity settled over me like a glass dome. My husband was cheating on me, and he was going to try to steal the roof over my head while he did it. The grief was there, yes, acid and hot, but something else rose with it, something sharp and clean. Not fury. Not yet. Focus. On Monday, I met the attorney with the folder Daniel had forgotten on the desk, the photo of the message from L, and Grandma's envelope from the dresser. He read, asked questions, made copies, then looked at me the way you look at someone balancing on the edge of a roof. We're going to secure the trust immediately, he said. We'll file a notice with the county against any encumbrance on the Willow Lane title. And Samantha, until I have reviewed everything, do not sign a single thing your husband gives you, even for a pizza delivery. He almost smiled. And start a journal. Dates, times, language. Think like an auditor. I went home and did exactly that. I wrote down the way Daniel said, merge, the way he asked how quickly the title could be updated, the way he kissed me like an obligation and smelled like someone else's perfume. I wrote down that he booked a conference in Palm Springs that week even though his company's annual conference had been last month. I wrote down that he started calling his mother more often, that he told her on speaker that Samantha will be in a better financial position soon. I wrote down the way my hands stopped shaking when I realized I was done being surprised. The night before Palm Springs, he set 2 wine glasses on the counter and slid the manila folder toward me again. Just sign the joint ownership thing, babe, he said, almost bored. It's safer. For both of us. I kept my face open and innocent like I was still the woman he thought he could con. Of course, I said, and took the pen and drew a line, not on the signature block, but across the page where a clause attempted to grant survivorship rights that would override my grandmother's will. Can you explain this part to me one more time? I asked, and he blinked, smiled, blinked again, as if the teleprompter in his head had gone fuzzy. He said a string of words that didn't answer the question. I nodded and set the pen down. I'll have Grandma's attorney review it, I said evenly. He laughed a fraction too loudly, and then he didn't. The corner of his eye twitched. You don't need a lawyer, he said, which is a thing only people who need you not to have a lawyer ever say. I picked up the pen again and underlined the clause slowly. I do, I said, and my voice sounded like Grandma's for a second. He left the room. The door to his office closed. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. Palm Springs tomorrow? Can't wait to celebrate. Champagne bottle. Heart. L. I turned my phone face down and opened my journal to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, he thinks I'm asleep. Under it, in smaller letters, I added, watch me wake up. The confirmation of Daniel's betrayal didn't come with fireworks either. It came with the quiet, poisonous strip of evidence that piled up until even my most forgiving instincts couldn't explain it away. That week he flew to Palm Springs for his so-called conference, and while he was gone, I logged into our shared credit card account to pay a bill. Nestled among grocery store purchases and gas charges was a line item that made my heart thud. La Valencia Hotel, 3 nights suite. I clicked the receipt, and there it was, a champagne package for two. My stomach twisted, but my hands were steady as I printed it, hole-punched it, and slid it into the binder I had started after Grandma's attorney told me to think like an auditor. I didn't confront him when he came home sunburned and smug, smelling faintly of sunscreen that wasn't mine. Instead, I played along, asked polite questions about his conference, watched him spin stories that didn't line up with the itinerary his company had published online. He didn't even notice my silence was sharper now, more focused. He thought I was still the woman who looked away. The next crack came the following weekend, when he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Daniel had always been obsessive about locking his devices, but maybe arrogance makes people sloppy. I wasn't looking for anything, I swear I wasn't, but the email notification glowed on the screen like a flare. Subject line, property transfer, draft 2. My pulse jumped. I clicked. Up came a PDF attached from the same advisor who had drawn up the first agreement. This one was bolder, cleaner, leaving no room for doubt. It described how, in the event of survivorship or dissolution of marriage, title to the Willow Lane property shall vest solely in the grantee, Daniel H. There it was in legalese. If Grandma's house was the treasure chest, Daniel had already drawn the map with an X over his own name. Worse still, in the thread below, he had written to this advisor, "Once she signs, we're golden. Elle says we can finally make plans without hiding. She's eager." My throat went dry. Elle, the champagne bottle. The heart. The woman he had built this scheme around. Not only was he betraying me as a wife, he was plotting to erase me financially too. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "People will surprise you when money is in the room." I whispered the words out loud, my own voice shaking. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the laptop out the window. Instead, I closed the lid gently, printed another copy for the binder, and smiled when Daniel walked through the door later, carrying takeout as if he were a devoted husband. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and didn't notice that my eyes lingered too long on his face. "You seem different lately," he said, half teasing. "Like you're finally relaxing." I laughed then, a sound that surprised even me. Relaxing? No, I was sharpening. He had no idea. That night, lying beside him, listening to his even breathing, I stared at the ceiling and felt a new kind of calm seep into me. Not the calm of resignation, the calm of strategy. The following days were a masterclass in pretending. Daniel floated ideas about renovating Willow Lane, about flipping it for cash flow, as if my grandmother's kitchen, with its ticking clock and pie safe, were just another investment property to gut. I nodded, feigned interest, even asked questions like, "What kind of renovations do you think would add the most value?" He lit up, launched into spreadsheets and projections, never noticing how I was baiting him to talk, to expose his plans in his own words. Each conversation I jotted down in my journal, time-stamped and dated. Grandma's attorney was right. Facts matter more than fury. But the deepest cut came one Thursday evening, when Daniel left his phone in the car, and it lit up with a call I couldn't ignore. The contact read Lydia. My chest clenched. I picked up. A woman's voice, silky and careless, said, "Hey, babe, just confirming, are we still on for Saturday? I can't wait to see the house. Imagine us there, all ours." I didn't answer. I hung up. My reflection in the dark car window looked like a stranger's, eyes wide but dry, lips pressed together in a line. I sat there for a long moment, breathing slowly, feeling the grief and rage and humiliation knot together into something harder. Not despair. Resolve. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He was planning to parade her through my grandmother's house, to turn the one place that had ever felt sacred into their playground. And he thought I was blind. I wasn't blind anymore. I was awake. Awake enough to start moving pieces he hadn't even noticed on the board. Awake enough to call the attorney again, to set up a meeting with a forensic accountant, to start securing copies of every document Daniel left lying around. Awake enough to keep my voice sweet and my face calm, because nothing disarms a betrayer faster than the illusion that their trap is still invisible. And as I slipped into bed beside him that night, whispering good night as if nothing had changed, I knew the truth. Daniel thought he was writing the story of my downfall. What he didn't know is that I was already drafting his. Once the shock of betrayal settled into something colder, I knew I couldn't afford to react like the heartbroken wife Daniel expected. If I cried, he'd spin it. If I raged, he'd hide the evidence. But if I stayed calm, if I played the fool, he'd keep leaving the breadcrumbs right where I could reach them. So I began my trap not with confrontation, but with quiet preparation. I met with Grandma's attorney again, this time sliding the binder across his desk like a gift. He flipped through the hotel receipts, the fake consultant invoices, the draft property transfer, his brows climbing higher with each page. "He's building a paper trail of fraud," the attorney said flatly. "The good news? He's arrogant enough to leave it all in writing. We can use that." He advised me to keep collecting, to document every suspicious phrase, every casual slip, and above all, never let Daniel know I suspected a thing. I walked out of his office with a plan already forming. At home, I shifted gears into actress mode. I asked Daniel about his advisor and nodded at his vague explanations, jotting down his words later in my journal. I let him believe I was stalling, that I just needed a little more time to process before signing anything. Meanwhile, I set up a second bank account in my name alone, moved half of our shared savings there quietly, and rerouted the trust notifications to an email he didn't know existed. When he left for another conference, I visited Willow Lane, this time with a locksmith. The house now had a new set of keys only I controlled, and cameras tucked discreetly in the corners. If he tried to bring Lydia there, I would know. The next step was leverage. Through a mutual friend, I learned Lydia worked at a small marketing firm downtown. One quick glance at her professional bio told me everything: ambitious, flashy, and probably dazzled by the idea of inheriting an old Victorian house worth 7 figures. I didn't approach her, not yet, but I filed it away. People like Lydia always overplayed their hand eventually. In the meantime, I quietly recorded one of Daniel's late-night phone calls when he forgot I was in the kitchen. "Don't worry, babe," he whispered into his phone, pacing the living room. "Once she signs, the place is ours. We'll flip it fast and be set for life." My hand trembled as I pressed record, but my face stayed blank when he caught sight of me. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I smiled and said I was getting water. He never suspected a thing. Piece by piece, the walls of his trap became mine. Every document, every message, every recording went into a neatly organized folder I labeled insurance. And yet I still cooked him dinner, kissed him goodbye in the mornings, and listened as he dreamed out loud about our future plans. He thought he was playing chess while I wandered the board clueless. But I had already moved my queen into position, and the day was coming when he'd realize the game was never his to win. The night my trap finally snapped shut looked so ordinary from the outside that Daniel never saw it coming. He came home with that smug grin plastered on his face, holding a bottle of wine like we were celebrating something real, not the end of his lies. "Tonight's the night, Sam," he said, sliding the manila folder across the table again. "All you have to do is sign, and we can start fresh." His tone was syrup-sweet, his eyes calculating, like he was already spending the inheritance he thought he'd stolen. I kept my face soft, my smile practiced, even as my heart pounded with the weight of what was about to happen. "Of course," I said, uncapping the pen, letting the silence stretch. Then I glanced up and added lightly, "But maybe we should have a witness, just to be safe." Daniel blinked, confused, but before he could ask, the doorbell rang. In walked Grandma's attorney, briefcase in hand, his presence filling the room with the authority of law. "What's this?" Daniel stammered, his grin slipping. "Just a precaution," I said smoothly, sliding the papers toward the attorney. He flipped them open, scanned the clauses, then looked Daniel square in the eye. "These documents would illegally transfer sole ownership of Willow Lane into your name. Samantha, do not sign." Daniel's face turned scarlet. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, snatching at the papers, but I was faster. I pulled out my phone, opened the recording app, and pressed play. His own voice filled the kitchen. Once she signs, the place is ours. We'll flip it fast and be set for life. His eyes widened in horror as the attorney raised a brow. Care to explain that, Mr. Hargrove? For once, Daniel had no script. He sputtered, called me paranoid, insisted it was taken out of context, but his words sounded thin, desperate. Then my phone buzzed, right on cue, an alert from the camera I had installed at Willow Lane. I turned the screen so he could see the live feed. Lydia, standing in my grandmother's living room, twirling a glass of champagne in her hand like she already owned the place. Daniel froze. The attorney leaned forward, his voice cold steel. You've built yourself quite the case for fraud, Daniel. Attempted theft, conspiracy, even trespassing. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel looked small. His shoulders hunched, his mouth opened and closed without sound, and the silence in the room grew heavy with his unraveling. I stood, sliding the binder of evidence onto the table, every receipt, every email, every text I had copied. You thought you could take everything from me, I said softly, my voice steady. But you forgot one thing. Grandma taught me how to keep what's mine. Daniel's eyes darted to the attorney, then back to me, but he knew it was over. With every page, every recording, every image, his empire of lies collapsed in on itself. And as he stood there in stunned silence, I finally felt the balance shift. For months I had played his game, smiling through betrayal, nodding through his schemes, but now the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. Daniel hadn't just lost his con. He had lost me, the house, the trust, and the future he thought he could steal. And I wasn't done yet. When the dust settled after that night, Daniel tried everything: rage, tears, begging, even threats, but none of it mattered anymore. The attorney filed the paperwork the very next morning, securing the title to Willow Lane under my name beyond dispute, and with the recordings and documents in hand, Daniel's leverage evaporated like smoke. I moved swiftly, contacting a divorce attorney who specialized in high-stakes separations, and for once I didn't hesitate. The journal I had kept for months became my shield, every date and quote backing my case, every receipt and recording stacked neatly in my favor. Daniel's face in court was almost pitiful, the once arrogant man reduced to stammering excuses no one believed, especially not the judge. When the final gavel fell, I walked out not just with Grandma's inheritance untouched, but with my freedom secured, while Daniel was left staring at mounting legal fees and a girlfriend who suddenly stopped answering his calls once the money disappeared. Lydia never showed her face again. Willow Lane became mine in the truest sense, not just a house I had inherited, but a fortress I had defended. On the first night I moved in alone, I sat at Grandma's kitchen table, the same table where she had taught me fractions with pie slices, and I whispered, I kept what's mine. The clock ticked on the mantel, steady and reassuring, like her approval reaching across time. From that night forward, I rebuilt my life with the same bricks of resolve she had left me piece by piece, stronger than before. Daniel thought he had written my ending, but all he did was give me the perfect beginning. I didn't just survive his betrayal. I rose above it, turning his scheme into my victory. And now, whenever I look at the Willow Lane house glowing in the evening sun, I remember the lesson burned into me forever. People will surprise you when money is in the room, but if you're prepared, if you're patient, and if you're brave enough to stand your ground, you'll always keep what's yours.